This happened to me. I don't tell it for sympathy, only because some things you survive by telling them straight, as they went down. The day my father was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, my stepbrother stepped to the lectern beside the mahogany casket and announced that Dad had left everything to him. The microphone hummed, the smell of lilies pressed against the back of my throat, and under the pew, my hand closed around the heavy cream envelope I'd tucked into my purse at dawn. Family, colleagues, and the priest froze. Evan held up a stapled packet as if it were scripture, and for a second the air in St. Cecilia's felt like it fled the room, as though my father had taken it with him. I didn't speak then. I only felt the notch of the brass zipper bite my thumb and counted the heartbeats between his lie and my proof. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I used to think funerals were made of silence. Turns out, they're made of the throat-clearing noises people make when they don't know what to say. St. Cecilia Parish in Boston is cavernous and kind in daylight, the stained glass pouring St. Cecilia's blue down the walls. But under all that light there were 100 small sounds: heels on tile, chair legs, shoe leather, someone's damp cough echoing like the last of a storm. Dad's casket, dark and gleaming, sat up front as if he were merely asleep and wouldn't appreciate the fuss. He'd liked things neat, simple, a good blue pen and a legal pad, coffee black. He'd never have wanted what Evan did, turning a eulogy into a theater of paper. His name is Evan Price, my stepmother's only son, 38 and permanently tan, like karma never visited him indoors. He wore a navy suit tailored the way money is tailored, and he held his jaw like a man who has never met a door that didn't open for him. The first time I met him, in the lobby of the Liberty Hotel, the one that used to be the Charles Street Jail, he leaned back in the leather chair and smiled with his incisors. "Mara," he'd said, as if I were the name of a store he'd just bought. "Your dad is a legend." Then he ordered 2 scotches and sipped both. My father, Daniel Walsh, wasn't a legend. He was a contractor who turned his knack for fixing things into Walsh & Sons Construction, then a regional firm that rehabbed brick warehouses in South Boston and Cambridge into offices so airy you could forget they used to be rooms where people stood and measured time by whistles. He'd come from Dorchester, a carpenter's son. The company name is plural, but I was his only child. "The sons are aspirational," he liked to joke. He said it in the hard weeks after Mom died, when I was 16 and furious. "A house is a hope before it's a home, kiddo. You build toward it." He met Lillian, elegant. Linen dresses in winter, lemon water, Pilates. The rustle of expensive things, at a fundraiser for the Boston Symphony at Symphony Hall, right in that banked light where violins sound like they have more colors than a person can hold. She wasn't cruel, not at first. She was simply unaccustomed to people whose curtains came from anywhere but Back Bay. There are ways for a woman to soften you without touching you. She'd take my father's arm at Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse, the one on Liberty Wharf, and say, "Danny, you didn't sign those health directives at Mass General, did you?" She'd smile like an apology before he could answer. The first year I thought she adored him. The second year I learned how admiration can be a plot. When Dad's cough started, he told me it was allergies. Ragweed, maybe. Boston has a way of letting the seasons hide inside one another. You don't notice the shift until one night you're walking across the public garden and the swan boats are tarped and the air smells like the Charles is thinking about winter. He said, "It's nothing." And then he stopped walking as if the sidewalk was a new thing and he didn't trust it. Bronchoscopy. The word clanged in my head like a bell when the pulmonologist at Mass General said it. "They found small cell." He folded his mouth around the syllables like wood shavings he had to spit. "We're going to hit it hard," the doctor said. "You're young." Dad was 62. He looked like a man in a L.L. Bean catalog. He was not young. But he squeezed my hand so hard I couldn't feel the coin of my grandmother's ring for hours. "We'll build toward it," he said. "Chemotherapy is a factory of hope. The infusion rooms hum. Nurses move like quiet plot lines. People wrap blankets around their knees and do the math you do when time becomes a ledger with fewer columns. I brought Dad cinnamon rolls from Flour Bakery in the South End and the crossword from the Globe, and we watched reruns of This Old House on my laptop, baffled by the way men on TV always find studs on the first try. Evan visited once with a paper bag from Italy, set down imported cheeses the color of moons, and then checked his watch. "I've got a call," he'd murmur, already rising. He always had a call. At first I thought he was keeping distance because he didn't know how to be tender. Later I understood. Distance was strategy. The first sign that something had shifted didn't look like a sign. It looked like Lillian's perfume outside the conference room at Walsh & Sons on Summer Street and the silver triangle of a notary stamp. "Daniel," she said, "we're only trying to make things easier." A man I didn't know, hair clipped too close and a smile meant to be invisible, slid papers toward my father. "Durable power of attorney. Healthcare proxy." "It's practical," Lillian said, leaning her chin on the back of her hand like a woman on a magazine cover. "You shouldn't have to think about logistics while you're healing." She chewed the last word like a vitamin. "I'm here," I said. "I can do it." I'd been moving into his house in Jamaica Plain a night at a time for weeks, my toothbrush on his sink like proof. He didn't look at me. He looked at the pen. "Mara," he said, gentle the way a man is tender with a temperamental hinge. "It's temporary," he signed. The notary's stamp thunked like a gavel. There are sounds that split a life into before and after. That was one of them. You don't notice a siphon until the barrel's half emptied. The stories started coming to me in the worst way, in the after. Someone on the second floor mentioned Evan pushing through a transfer to streamline payroll. Another whispered, "Why did we sign those vendor checks in batches?" Lillian began arriving with a leather folio and leaving with files. "I'll keep your desk tidy," she told me once, smoothing my stapler as if it were hair. And then, one morning at Mass General, a nurse asked who would be making decisions if sedation became necessary, and my father looked to Lillian. Not to me. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and oranges. I stood there holding a cup of coffee I couldn't feel, thinking, he signed because he loves you. He signed because you asked him with the voice you use when you call a dog away from a road. He signed because he was tired. There's a particular brand of cruelty that dresses itself as relief. I learned its fit. When he died, it was a crisp October, the kind that makes Boston look like a city designed by someone who likes sweaters. We held the wake at Keeney Funeral Home in Dorchester, where the directors still know you by the casseroles left in your car by neighbors. People brought stories about my father like they were coins, and I was a fountain. "He fixed my porch after the nor'easter," one said. "He taught me the trick with the shim," another murmured. The room was warm with him, and then Evan arrived in his navy suit with a man in a charcoal suit. Charcoal introduced himself as counsel. "Only practical," Lillian whispered, her hand on my shoulder, her nails moons of French polish. I should have seen it coming. Step 1, a stack of documents. Step 2, a new accountant for simplicity. Step 3, a revised will, drafted, they would say later, in the final illness when priorities clarify. I was in the kitchen the night before the funeral when I found the blue folder. It was where Dad kept all the paper that mattered. The deed to the condo on Center Street, the company's original articles of organization, the photograph of my mother in a weathered envelope. In the pocket behind the safe deposit keys, I found the cream envelope addressed in my father's blocky handwriting. "Open if we ever fight," it said. The ink had bled in one place like the pen had paused there and grieved. Inside was a legal copy of a will, dated 2 years before he'd met Lillian, then amended a year after they married. The amendment was simple. I provide for my wife, Lillian Walsh, with a life estate in the home at Center Street and an annuity of $5,000 per month from dividends of Walsh & Sons while she remains my widow. All remaining real and personal property shall pass to my daughter, Mara Walsh. The signatures were old friends, Mr. Quigley from the old neighborhood, witnessed at his office over the Dunkin' on Morrissey Boulevard, and a nurse from Mass General whose note said self-proved, notarized at a CVS in Newton. It wasn't fancy. It was my father in ink. By the time we sat for the mass, I had that envelope zippered into my purse. I wasn't planning to make a scene. There's a difference between proof and theater. I wasn't Evan, but theater loves a microphone. When the priest finished the homily about carpenters in scripture and steady hands, Evan rose. He didn't ask permission. He simply moved, and the people in the pews moved their focus the way schools of fish bend around a predator. On behalf of the family, he began, I want to thank you all for being here. He touched the papers in his hands with a lover's familiarity. I also think it's responsible to let everyone know that Daniel Walsh's estate is in order, and he smiled that incisive smile, have been named sole heir. Someone gasped. I think it was me. The company will be safe, he added, as if that word, safe, were a blanket he could pull over a theft. Grief is a fog. Rage is a bell. Mine rang and cut the fog clean in two. Lillian's hand tightened on my wrist, not tender, tight. Not now, she whispered, her breath citrus and cold. I slid my hand to the brass zipper, felt its teeth, and asked myself if my father would have wanted a war in a church. I looked at the casket and thought about the two kinds of silence, the kind that keeps the peace and the kind that keeps a lie warm. Then I did nothing. I let Evan talk until his words formed a scaffold I could yank later in one practiced pull. After the burial, after the surreal buffet of finger sandwiches at the house, after relatives I hadn't seen since First Communion hugged me with their perfume and memory, the house emptied the way a tide slides back. The door had barely closed when Evan and Lillian and Charcoal Suit took the big chairs in the living room like jurors who'd been excused from sequester. We'll begin with the petition for informal probate, Charcoal said, crossing an ankle. But given that the will is self-proved, I don't foresee any difficulty. He said difficulty the way one says gnat. He slid a copy of the will across my father's coffee table, its edges aligned with the grain. It was recent, dated 3 months ago when Dad was gaunt and brave and doing the kind of math no one should have to do. It named Evan as personal representative and sole heir. It provided for Lillian with what looked generous if you didn't know that money is not the same as a home. My name appeared once. I leave my daughter Mara the pearl ring that belonged to her grandmother. I looked down at my left hand. The ring was already there. You forged this, I said. Mara, Lillian breathed, scandalized, like I'd sworn in front of the priest. Evan didn't flinch. You're grieving, he said. And grief is a word people use to gaslight you out of your intelligence. I was here every day. I handled the paperwork because your father wanted to spare you the stress. He told me. He let the sentence hang, a fish waiting for a hook. He said you were emotional. There are 100 ways to be a woman in a room where men sit comfortably. I chose the one where you take notes. Who drafted it? I asked. Wiles, Hastings, and Bell, Charcoal said. A good firm on Federal Street. They represent men who own buildings that other men work in. And the witnesses? A nurse from the hospice team and... He checked the page. A Mr. Adrian Reed. Friend of the family, Evan put in. He's your golf buddy, I said. From the country club in Brookline. Friend of the family, Evan repeated. It's funny how rich men will call anyone who can hold a 9-iron family. I didn't tell them about the envelope in my purse. I didn't tell them about Dad's real amendment, the one that was handwritten by a man who still believed paper mattered, who believed the word daughter had gravity. I only said, then you won't mind if we do this formally. I smiled the way women smile in boardrooms when they've memorized the bylaws. I'll be filing a caveat. Charcoal's smile dimmed the way a cloud moves across a pool. There's no need for conflict, he said. It's all in order. Then the judge will agree with you, I said, standing. And if it's also in order, Evan, you won't object when I ask the notary for her logbook and the hospice for their visit records. And while I'm at it, I tick the points off on my fingers because theatrics can be honest. I'll subpoena Adrian's calendar for the date of execution and the hospital's security footage for the corridor outside my father's room. Cameras don't get tired or confused, Evan shrugged. You can play lawyer if you want. The company needs you in a calmer role. HR, community outreach maybe. You're good at feelings. He slid a card toward me with a title pre-printed. Director of Culture. There's a special corner of hell where men invent fake jobs for women whose real names they'd like to erase. Get out of my father's house, I said, still smiling. The thing about rage is that it tastes like iron if you keep it in your mouth long enough. We're done here. They left as if they were doing me a courtesy. On the porch, the October air had a bite. I pressed the cream envelope flat against my lap and made a list on the back of a grocery receipt, because that's how I stay alive. Paper, ink, verbs. Step 1. Call the Suffolk Probate and Family Court at the Edward W. Brooke Courthouse. Step 2. Mr. Quigley. Find him, the notarized affidavit from the CVS in Newton. Step 3. Hospice nurse. Get her full name, verify the date she witnessed, match it to chart notes. Step 4. Hospital security for Mass General. Learn who I need to sweet talk in administration. Step 5. Accountant. Evan's streamlined payroll had left sawdust trails. My job was to follow each one with a broom, collecting splinters of truth until I could build a raft. I didn't cry that night. I took Dad's brass Zippo from the dish by the front door, flicked it, watched flame lift with that hungry little sound it makes. He used to carry it even after he quit smoking because it made him feel ready for rainstorms and candles and string ends. I lit the candle on the mantel and watched the first inch of wax pool, thinking of how quickly heat remakes a thing. In the morning, I would be different. But right then, I was a daughter with a ledger, and across from my name was the word fight. The clerk at the probate court told me exactly what to do, because some angels wear name badges. File your formal petition, she said, her Boston accent turning the R in the middle into a ghost. Check the box to object to informal probate and file the caveat. Put them on notice. You'll want to request copies of any prior wills on record. You can do it today if you're ready. I love women who speak like sledgehammers. I took the forms to a table where sunlight made a rectangle on the wood and filled them out with my favorite blue pen, Dad's pen. When I slid them back under the glass, the clerk looked me in the eye. You'd be surprised how often feelings fix themselves when the paperwork's right, she said. Not surprised at all, I said. Thank you. Mr. Quigley had retired. His receptionist, who still had a Red Sox calendar pinned over her desk and a candy jar filled with green tea Kit Kats, gave me an address in Quincy. He opened the door wearing a flannel shirt and the kind of sadness men wear when they've outlived too many clients. Your father, he said, and the way he said it told me he'd liked him. He made tea in the old way, kettle and time. I showed him the amendment. He pressed a finger to his lip where the steam rose and nodded. He made me promise to keep a copy, he said, going to a file cabinet that looked older than me. He pulled a folder, tapped the edges, and opened it like a priest with a missal. There it is. Witnessed, notarized. He said, Quigley, you know me. I want my wife taken care of. I want my girl to have the house. If Lillian outlives me, God bless her, but that house is Mara's home. Those were his words. He laid the copy beside my original. The signatures held hands across 5 years like they recognized each other. Would you be willing to testify? I asked. He looked at the window, at a street where 2 kids were playing basketball with a hoop that had seen better summers. For your father, he said. I'll put on a suit. The hospice nurse, when I found her through a combination of phone calls, luck, and a social worker who had a soft spot for daughters, cried when I told her why I was calling. I don't love being dragged into family fights, she said, but I loved your dad. He called me coach when I made him walk the hall. He made me feel like I was doing something that mattered. When I asked if she'd witnessed a will 3 months ago, her pause was different. A nurse's thinking pause. 3 months ago, she said slowly, I had 2 patients that week who asked me about wills. Your dad wasn't one. He told me his was already ironclad and he didn't want to fiddle with the board. That was how he put it. He said, if I touch it now, the whole thing'll wobble. She made a promise to check her charting and call me back. When she did, her voice was angry. I wasn't there the afternoon your stepbrother's lawyer says I witnessed, she said. I was at a home visit in Roxbury. I have GPS timestamps on my notes. She emailed them while we were on the phone. The latitude and longitude felt like steel. Back home in Jamaica Plain, I laid everything out on the dining table like a detective in a show that's already been renewed for a 2nd season. The cream envelope, Quigley's copy, the hospice notes with their GPS, a list of names, the probate court filing receipt. I took a photograph for myself because a picture of truth can keep you steady when a liar smiles. Then I ordered takeout from El Oriental de Cuba on Center Street because I had forgotten to be a person all day, and I ate black beans and rice at the table where my father had made lists of lumber. I thought about the ways men vanish and the ways we keep them with us anyway. Evan's first escalation came as a voicemail. Heard you filed, he said, voice warm as poison. Bold. Look, there's no reason to drag this out and embarrass yourself. If you drop the caveat, I'll have the company give you a consulting fee for, what's the phrase, transition services. You can even stay in the house through New Year's. Lillian's generous. He laughed as if he'd told a joke that other people would have to pretend was funny. I didn't save the voicemail. I transcribed it and sent the transcript to myself. I saved the transcription twice. Then came the email from a partner at Wiles, Hastings & Bell addressed to me, with Re-estate of Daniel Walsh in the subject line, and words that read like silk and shackles. We urge you to consider the emotional cost of litigation, it cooed, particularly given your loving relationship with your stepmother. Our client is prepared to be magnanimous. Magnanimous is a word men choose when they don't want to say merciful because mercy implies power. They're too honest to admit they're wielding against someone who doesn't deserve it. 2 days later, my father's head of accounting, a woman named Sherry with a long braid and a longer memory, texted me a photograph of a ledger. You didn't get this from me, she wrote. The photo showed transfers, 10,000 here, 15 there, routed through a shell vendor with a Cambridge mailbox store address. When I looked up the vendor name, it led to a website that might as well have been a shrug. Consulting. Evan had left footprints a child could follow. I took the file to a forensic accountant, recommended by a friend from Northeastern, who'd survived a divorce that had almost eaten her. His name was Ben. He wore sneakers and talked like the only thing he loved more than numbers was watching numbers confess. Fraudsters are lazy, he said, tapping his keyboard. They get away with it because no one checks. The minute someone checks, they panic and either double down or settle. Your guy looks like a double-downer. He found patterns. He found an invoice that had been date-stamped on a Sunday by a system that didn't do Sunday stamps unless someone overwrote it. He found an ACH authorization signed by D. Walsh in a hand that didn't know my father's habit of making the W like a mountain range. You could take this to the AG, he said. But for the probate hearing, all you need is enough to blunt force the credibility of that will. He smiled, a little fierce. You've got a sledgehammer. The hearing date came. November 17th, Suffolk Probate, Edward W. Brooke Courthouse, Courtroom 3. The morning sun tried. The wind off the river bit anyway. I wore my grandmother's ring, the slate gray suit I use for interviews and indignities, and my father's Zippo in my pocket like a talisman. The cream envelope went into my purse, along with the Quigley duplicate in a plastic sleeve, the hospice logs, Ben's summary, and the receipt where the clerk had stamped my caveat like a blessing. When I reached the courthouse steps, Evan was already there, flanked by Lillian and Charcoal and a junior associate whose job it was to carry a briefcase and a face that looked like it had accidentally grown a beard. Evan looked me up and down as if I were a new model of a thing his money might buy, if only it did something useful. "Mara," he said, "you look tired." "I slept," I said, and it was true. The kind of sleep that comes after you've told a story to yourself so many times that even your dreams start taking notes. Inside, the courtroom was what courtrooms are, bland and holy. The judge, a woman with hair the color of a storm cloud swept into a bun that probably had its own union rules, looked down at us with the fatigue of someone who has heard the world's lies and knows their cadences by heart. "We're here on the matter of the estate of Daniel Walsh," she began, and the words moved through me like medicine. Charcoal started. He spoke in the firm's cadence, 2 parts reason, 1 part lullaby. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward petition for informal probate complicated by a grieving daughter's refusal to accept her father's wishes. The will dated August 12th reflects a thoughtful reallocation of assets to ensure the stable stewardship of Walsh & Sons and the care of Mr. Walsh's widow. The document is self-proved. The witnesses are available." Not available," I said, standing. My voice was steady because I had rehearsed it on the walk over, each syllable a stare. "One is available. The other was in Roxbury at the time of signing. I have the nurse's GPS-verified chart. Notes." I held the paper at the corner of the way. "Dad used to hold a 2x4 to show a man the warp it carried. Judge's eyebrow did the skeptical thing that makes liars adjust their ties. "We'll get there," she said. "You'll have time to present." Evan smiled at me across the aisle, small, a private joke. He had all the trappings: lawyers, suits, the ease of a man accustomed to losing only on purpose. He had brought a will like a weapon. He had the confidence of men who inherit it. He had every advantage that matters if you've never met a woman who knows how to document the truth. The judge glanced at the docket, tapped a pen against her lower lip, and said, "Ms. Walsh, you've filed a caveat. If you intend to challenge the August will, you'll need to provide evidence regarding its execution and introduce any prior controlling instruments." "Do you have such a document?" I reached for the brass zipper, felt its teeth catch for a fraction of a second like fate cinching. I unzipped my purse, slid my hand inside, and touched the edge of the envelope my father had labeled in his own square handwriting. My pulse thudded in my ears like a hammer landing square. I drew the envelope out and held it up so even the junior associate could see the crest of the paper, the way time had softened its corners. Evan's smile went still, as if I'd dimmed the room. I walked toward the bench with my father's will in my hand, and every woman he'd ever trusted walking beside me in the air. I handed the envelope up, and when the clerk took it, I felt like I'd let go of a rope I'd been hauling hand over hand since my father's last breath. The judge broke the seal with the neat little gesture of someone who has opened 100 lives on paper. She read silently for a long few seconds that stretched like wire, then turned to Charcoal. "Counsel," she said mildly, "I'm looking at a will executed before your client's instrument, with a later handwritten amendment that has been notarized and appears self-proved. We'll need to hear from the witnesses to both." Charcoal cleared his throat. "Of course, Your Honor." He recovered quickly. "Men like him always do. As to the August instrument, we have the hospice nurse and Mr. Adrian Reed." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Walsh?" "I have Mr. Quigley, the attorney who maintained a copy of my father's prior will and witnessed the amendment. And I have the hospice nurse's chart notes indicating she was not present, on the August date and time the other side claims. I've also subpoenaed Mass General's visitor logs and the notary's journal." "Very well," the judge said. "Let's proceed with witnesses. Mr. Reed first." They called him up. Adrian Reed was the picture of Brookline weekends. Tan line from a watch, haircut that said, "No one here pays retail." The faint cologne of a man who believes his scent makes a room better for having had him. He lifted his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took the stand. Charcoal guided him through the story like it was a par 3 they'd played together. You were present on August 12th in Mr. Walsh's hospital room? Yes, Reed said without looking at me. I arrived around 2 p.m. And you witnessed him sign this document? Charcoal held up the August will. I did. Along with the hospice nurse? Yes. Charcoal nodded, satisfied, and turned him over. That practiced little swivel of the body like a dance step. Your witness, I stood. I am not a lawyer. But I grew up watching my father measure twice. Mr. Reed, what did the room look like? He blinked. Pardon? My father's room. Mass General. What did you see when you walked in? He shifted. A hospital room, he said with a faint laugh. A bed. Machines. Your stepmother. Which way did the window face? He stared at me. How would I know that? North, I said. The window faced the river. If you'd been there that afternoon, you would have seen the way the sun bounces off the glass of the Science Museum like it's trying to forget it's autumn. Charcoal started to object. The judge let me have it. Sustained as to the commentary, she said. Ask your question, Ms. Walsh. Mr. Reed, what color scrubs was the nurse wearing? Blue, he said, eager, like he'd found something safe to say. Hospital blue? The judge looked down at her papers, the faintest quirk at the corner of her mouth. I held up the hospice log. The hospice nurse on my father's team wears purple scrubs. She wears them because her wife's grandmother loved purple and died on a Tuesday, and she has honored her ever since. More to the point, on August 12th, the nurse was in Roxbury. Her GPS-verified note places her on Humboldt Avenue from 1:28 p.m. to 3:41 p.m. Then she went to a patient in Roslindale. I have the printouts, Your Honor. Charcoal rose. Your Honor, this is... The judge was already looking at the log. Mr. Reed, she said without looking up. What time did you arrive? He licked his lip. 2, he repeated softly. 2-ish. I laid the Mass General visitor log on the evidence cart. The hospital's security system logs visitors with government ID. Mr. Reed signed in at 3:48 p.m. The will purports to have been executed at 2:15 p.m. I tapped the page lightly. And he signed out at 3:56 p.m. The judge finally looked at him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Sir, she said, were you present when this document was signed? Adrian told the lie again. The way a man repeats a story he's practiced because the practice itself feels like truth if you do it enough. Yes? Counsel, the judge said to Charcoal, her tone flat as a level. You may want to confer with your witness. They huddled. When they unhuddled, Adrian stared at the table as if it had betrayed him. I was asked to sign, he said quietly. I was told it was a formality. I didn't look at the time. Who asked you? I asked. He kept staring at the wood. Evan, a page shifted. Someone in the gallery exhaled regret. Evan didn't turn toward him. He uncrossed his legs and crossed them again. A tiny adjustment like a tick. Call Mr. Quigley, the judge said. He took the stand in his flannel jacket like a man who will tell the truth whether or not anyone invites him to. He spoke about my father in a voice that made me bite my cheek hard enough to taste iron. He laid out the prior will. The amendment's words, how my father had come into his office over the Duncan and said, I want to keep my wife in comfort and my daughter in home. He described the signing, the nurse from the clinic who'd stopped by for coffee and agreed to serve as witness, the CVS notary who'd stamped the affidavit. He had his copy. The judge compared the two like she was lining up pieces of molding before a miter cut. Any cross? The judge asked. Charcoal stood, caught between pride and a survival instinct that told him his shoes were in a puddle. No questions, Your Honor. The judge turned to me. Ms. Walsh, she said, you've also brought evidence pertinent to the August will's execution beyond the witness discrepancy? I nodded. Your Honor, I subpoenaed the notary's journal for August 12th. There's no entry for my father. The notary was at a branch in Newton from 10 to 6, with 2 breaks logged at noon and 4. No Daniel Walsh appeared. Additionally, the signature on the August instrument's ACH authorization for a posthumous transfer. I felt Ben lean forward behind me, approving. Does not match my father's signature style. Our forensic accountant has prepared a short summary of irregularities that point to motive. Charcoal objected on relevance. The judge overruled. Motive in probate isn't dispositive, she said, but it helps me understand why a forged will might exist. Let's hear the highlights. Ben kept it surgical. He always did. He noted the shell vendor, the Sunday timestamp, the ACH authorization style. He said calmly, I don't need to conclude fraud for the court to see the pattern. But when we see patterns like this, we alert the Attorney General's office. I have done so. He sat back. Evan tilted his chin as if he could intimidate a spreadsheet. The judge folded her hands. There is a silence in courtrooms just before a decision, like the air itself knows to make room. Here is what we are going to do, she said finally, voice even. First, the petition for informal probate on the August instrument is denied. We will proceed formally. Second, I am appointing you, Ms. Walsh, as special personal representative on a limited basis to marshal and secure estate assets, pending this court's determination on the controlling instrument. Third, Mr. Price, she looked directly at Evan, you will produce within 5 days a complete accounting of any transactions you initiated under color of authority since Mr. Walsh's passing. Fourth, I am referring the matter of the August instrument's execution, and any financial irregularities, to the Suffolk County District Attorney and the Attorney General for review. Fifth, counsel for Mrs. Walsh. She nodded at Lillian. If your client requires counsel separate from Mr. Price's interests, I strongly recommend you secure it immediately. She lifted the gavel as if it weighed no more than a pencil and brought it down once. We are in recess. It wasn't handcuffs on the spot. Real life is slower than movies, even when justice is the scene partner. But when we spilled into the corridor, the air tasted like new rain. Evan leaned in with a smile that had lost its incisors. You think this is over because a judge wants more paper? He whispered. Paper is cheap. My father didn't think so, I said. I didn't whisper. I didn't need to. The corridor belonged to me for one warm second, the kind a daughter gets when she has done something her father would have recognized as a beam plumb to the earth. And neither does the AG. The Boston Business Journal called Sherry 24 hours later. Someone in the courthouse must have done what clerks sometimes do when a story smells like rot and money. Make sure sunlight finds it. The headline wasn't kind to Evan. It was kind to my father. Construction Scion's will contested, amid allegations of forgery, embezzlement, it read, and under it, Walsh & Sons employees express relief at possible return to original vision. Relief. The word broke me open for a minute at the kitchen table before I pulled myself together and called a meeting. We gathered in the Walsh & Sons conference room on Summer Street, the one with the wall of exposed brick my father had insisted on leaving unpainted, because a building should remember the life it's already had. Sherry, 2 project managers with coffee and paper cups, the head of field operations, a junior estimator who'd been crying in the bathroom when I walked in. Here's what's going to happen, I told them. The court has ordered a freeze on discretionary transfers. I am the special personal representative. Payroll continues. Vendors with legitimate invoices will be paid. The fraudulent vendor will be reported. If anyone gets a call from Evan or anyone purporting to be acting for him, you refer them to me. We are not a ship without a captain. We are a crew without a pirate. They laughed a little. I saw men and women who had been waiting to exhale since the first check went sideways. I saw the company my father had built lean back toward itself. Lillian called me that night, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. They said I should get my own lawyer, she said. They're right, I said. I didn't soften it, but I didn't sharpen it either. Under Dad's real will, you have a life estate in the house and an annuity. You'll be provided for. But if you knew about the forged will, if you participated, I didn't, she said quickly. Too quickly. Then, I thought we were Streamlining. Evan said Daniel wanted him to handle things, that you were so emotional. I closed my eyes. There are some lies so old they sound like tradition. If you sign an affidavit about what you saw and what you did, and if you return any files you removed from the office, I'll honor every line of Dad's amendment. You'll stay in the house. You'll have the annuity. But if you choose Evan over truth again, I will see you in court. She was quiet a long time. Your father loved you, she said at last softly. He told me once that you see through walls. The phone clicked. 30 minutes later, my inbox pinged with scans of documents she should never have had. The arrest didn't happen at the country club, though I pictured it that way 100 times. The officers walking onto the 9th green while the foursome went slack-jawed. The way a man whose only uniforms are bespoke would look in handcuffs. It happened in a glass lobby downtown when Evan arrived for a status update with Wiles, Hastings, and Bell, and 2 detectives from the Suffolk County DA's office were waiting in chairs that suddenly looked like judgment. They let him put down his leather briefcase. They let him call charcoal. They read him his rights. The news trucks arrived like seagulls. When the call came, I was at the Edward W. Brooke Courthouse again, this time in a quieter conference room, signing a stipulation to pay the field crew's hazard bonuses on a delayed project in the seaport. The DA's office asked if I wanted to be notified. I had asked. They told me clean. He's in custody, the investigator said. Charges include uttering a forged instrument, larceny over $1,200, attempted fiduciary fraud. She paused. You did good work, Ms. Walsh. I did the paper, I said. My father did the work. The formal probate hearing that finally resolved the will happened on a gray day in December, the kind where Boston looks like it has been penciled in first and colored later. The judge found the August instrument invalid. She admitted the prior will and the amendment. She appointed me personal representative. She ordered a full accounting. She looked at me, and in her look was the kindness of understanding that a victory is sometimes just a nicer word for a loss you've told the truth about long enough. Ms. Walsh, she said, your father's estate passes according to his wishes. Outside, the wind made it feel like the buildings on New Chardon Street were taller than they were. Ben met me on the steps. Ben never hugged, but he did then, quick and solid. Do you know what you did? He said. You made a straight line out of a tangle. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and clean, like a house after a storm where the windows matter more, because you squeegee them yourself and the light comes through. I called Lillian. You can stay, I told her, and heard the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. We'll put the annuity through as Dad intended. I'll need the affidavit notarized tomorrow. I'll be at the CVS in Newton at noon, she said wryly, and I thought, it's something to learn a joke. There were smaller wars after that. There always are. Vendors who had to be told they would be paid late and then believed it when, for once, a woman said, I give you my word. Clients who wanted to know if we were stable and then signed on when I walked them through a site plan with a steadier hand than the last guy. Employees who needed raises and were due them. The Attorney General's office sent letters and then subpoenas, and then another letter that said restitution, and the number in it made me put my hand on the table and feel how solid wood can be. Evan made bail, then violated it with a call to Sherry he thought we wouldn't trace, then sat behind glass in Nashua Street and told a public defender that he was the victim of a feminist conspiracy. The paper didn't print that part. Men who think they have been wronged by consequences like to call it a movement. On Christmas Eve, I walked through the finished project in the seaport and ran my hand along a railing my father had insisted be stained dark because hands should know where the edge is. The crew's laughter rose from somewhere below, and the building, new as a newborn's yawn, made the small settling noises a structure makes when it learns to be itself. I took the brass Zippo from my pocket and flicked it once. Flame lifted. I held it close to a ribbon the decorator had tied around a little spruce near the lobby, and then let it go out because I have learned that some fires aren't mine. People have asked me if I forgive Lillian. I don't, not exactly. I also don't spend time tasting the old bitterness. She brings hydrangeas to the porch in June and remembers to salt the steps in February, and once in April she left a tin of lemon bars with a note that said, "He loved these." I give her space to be human, and I do not care if the neighbors call this generosity or weakness. I know the difference. The last piece of theater belonged to me, but it wasn't a show. It was a letter. I wrote it on the heavy cream paper I found in my father's desk, the kind that makes a pen behave. I addressed it to the men and women who bid us on jobs, and the banks that floated us, and the union hall that populated our sites with the bodies that turned drawings into buildings. I told them exactly what had happened, and exactly how we would keep it from happening again. I included the clause from my father's amendment, word for word. I provide for my wife with a life estate and for my daughter with my house and my company. People like to say that paper is dry. They have never watched a dry line reroute a river. When spring came, Boston turned soft again. I drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery on a Sunday when the magnolias were opening like hands. I brought a small bag of screws and a Phillips head, and the little plaque I'd had made with a line my father loved, "You build toward it." The groundskeeper had already set the stone and the dates. I kneeled, set the plaque in the soil at the base, and tightened it in until it didn't wobble. The wind came off Fresh Pond in a way that smelled like second chances. I sat on the bench and told him all of it. The court. The envelope. The Zippo, Evan, Lillian, Sherry's raise. Ben's sneakers. The way the judge never lifted her voice and still made truth louder than the lie. I told him about the house, his house, that still creaks in the same places, the way the boards in the hallway settle at night like a memory shifting its weight. I told him about the ledger I keep in the kitchen drawer, how the first page is his handwriting and the second page is mine. I told him that I knew who I was because I watched him be who he was for so long that the muscle remembered. When I stood to go, I realized I'd been palming the lighter like a worry stone. I put it on the bench for a second and then, on impulse, slipped it into the pocket of the cream envelope I still keep in my purse. Paper and fire together. If anyone had told me a year ago that the heaviest thing in my life would be a piece of paper and the lightest would be a flame, I would have laughed. Now I know better. Back home that night, the house breathed. Houses do that if you love them long enough. While the neighborhood went quiet and the 39 bus hissed on Center Street, and the cat 2 doors down announced heartbreak to the alley, I set the cream envelope in the drawer beside the brass Zippo and closed it. The wood made that soft click it makes when a drawer is exactly aligned. The furnace cycled. Somewhere, a small sound answered in the old joists. When the house settled that night, I swore I heard him hammer once, just once, and the nail held. The end.